The party paradox. Picture this, it's Friday evening in a bustling London pub. The room hums with conversation, laughter spilling over pint glasses, the faint scent of ale mixing with perfume and cologne. In one corner, James stands animated, his third pint barely touched as he moves from group to group, telling stories, his energy seemingly multiplying with each new conversation. His eyes are bright, his gestures expansive. Across the room, Sarah clutches her wine glass like a lifeline. She arrived 2 hours ago, and though she smiled, laughed at jokes, and held her own in conversations, something inside her is depleting. Her responses are becoming shorter. The noise feels sharper. She glances at her watch again. When did socializing become exhausting? This isn't rudeness or social anxiety. Sarah genuinely likes these people. She wanted to come. Yet here she is, fantasizing about her quiet flat, a book, and blessed silence. Meanwhile, James just ordered another round for strangers he met 10 minutes ago. If you've ever felt like Sarah, you've probably asked yourself, what's wrong with me? Why do others seem to draw energy from the very situations that drain mine? The answer lies not in weakness or social incompetence, but in the fundamental architecture of your personality. And one man who spent his career understanding the authentic self and human experience can help us understand this phenomenon, Carl Rogers. But what Rogers discovered wasn't just about socializing. It was about the most important relationship you'll ever have, the one with yourself. And understanding this could transform how you experience every social situation for the rest of your life. Who was Carl Rogers? Carl Ransom Rogers was born in 1902 in Oak Park, Illinois, but it was his childhood on a Wisconsin farm that would shape his revolutionary approach to understanding human behavior. Growing up in a strict religious household, Rogers experienced isolation. He would later describe his youth as one where close, communicative relationships were completely absent. He was socially incompetent, peculiar, a loner with little place in the world of persons. Yet from this loneliness emerged something remarkable, a profound curiosity about what makes people truly themselves. Rogers initially pursued agriculture at the University of Wisconsin, then theology, believing he would become a minister. But a trip to China in 1922 as part of the World Student Christian Federation changed everything. Exposed to different cultures and perspectives, Rogers began questioning his rigid religious upbringing. He realized the path to understanding people wasn't through doctrine, but through listening to their lived experience. He shifted to psychology, completing his doctorate at Columbia University in 1931, just as the Great Depression gripped the world. This timing mattered. Rogers would spend 12 years working with vulnerable children in Rochester, New York, children damaged by poverty, neglect, and the failures of social systems. He discovered that elaborate psychological theories often meant nothing when sitting across from a traumatized child. What mattered was genuine human connection. This realization led Rogers to develop person-centered therapy in the 1940s. At a time when Freud dominated psychology with his focus on unconscious drives and repressed memories, and Skinner pushed behaviorism that reduced humans to conditioned responses, Rogers proposed something radical. People are inherently motivated toward growth and have the capacity to understand themselves better than any expert ever could. He became the sixth most eminent psychologist of the 20th century, served as president of the American Psychological Association in 1947, and was even nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 1987, the year he died. But Rogers' most profound contribution wasn't a therapy technique. It was a framework for understanding the authentic self, and how we become who we really are. This framework holds the key to understanding why the same social gathering energizes one person while exhausting another. Because what Rogers understood was this: the energy you feel in social situations has far less to do with the situation itself, and far more to do with how congruent you're being with your authentic self. The self-concept and congruence. At the heart of Rogers' theory lies a deceptively simple idea: you have a self-concept. This is your organized, consistent understanding of who you are, your abilities, your values, how you relate to others and to the world. It's the answer to the question, who am I, that lives in your mind. But here's where it gets interesting: your self-concept and your actual experience don't always match. Rogers called the alignment between these two things congruence. When who you think you are matches what you genuinely experience and feel, you are in a state of congruence. This feels like authenticity, like being truly yourself. You experience psychological harmony, confidence, and energy. When there's a mismatch, Rogers called this incongruence. And incongruence feels exactly like you'd imagine: anxiety, inner conflict, exhaustion, a nagging sense that something isn't quite right. Let me give you an example from Rogers' own work. Imagine a woman named Claire who comes to therapy. She describes herself as someone who loves socializing, who thrives at parties, who's the life of every gathering. After all, her mother always praised her when she was outgoing, and her father beamed with pride when she entertained guests. Being social became part of her self-concept: I am an outgoing, social person. But as Rogers would help her explore, Claire's actual experience tells a different story. She feels drained after events. She dreads weekend invitations. She fantasizes about cancelled plans. Yet she continues attending everything, maintaining the persona, because her self-concept demands it. Claire is living in incongruence. The self she presents to the world doesn't match her actual, organismic experience, as Rogers called it. And this incongruence doesn't just cause psychological distress. It's utterly exhausting. Now contrast this with Daniel, who genuinely identifies as someone who recharges through solitude and meaningful one-on-one conversation. When Daniel attends a large party, he doesn't force himself to work the room. He finds a corner, has a deep conversation with one person, perhaps steps outside for fresh air when he needs it. Then he leaves when he's genuinely ready, without guilt. Daniel is living congruently. His self-concept aligns with his experience. And paradoxically, even though he's at the same party as Claire, he leaves less exhausted because he hasn't been fighting against his authentic self all evening. Rogers believed that psychological health depends almost entirely on the degree of congruence between self-concept and experience. The more congruent you are, the more you trust your own reactions, the more authentic you become, and critically, the more energy you have because you're not constantly managing a performance. This is Rogers' first major insight into social energy. Exhaustion often comes not from the social situation itself, but from maintaining an incongruent self-concept within that situation. But Rogers went deeper. Because he asked a crucial question: why do we develop incongruent self-concepts in the first place? And the answer reveals something profound about how we learn to betray our authentic nature from childhood. Conditions of worth and the false self. Rogers noticed something troubling in his clinical work: people routinely denied or distorted their genuine experiences to maintain their self-concept. But why would anyone do this? The answer lies in what Rogers called conditions of worth. From birth, we need to feel valued, respected, loved. Rogers termed this the need for positive regard. It's fundamental to human survival and well-being. But here's the problem: we quickly learn that love and acceptance often come with conditions. A child expresses anger at her brother. Her mother responds, "Good girls don't get angry. We're disappointed in you." The message is clear: your anger is unacceptable. To receive love, you must deny this part of yourself. Another child shows interest in art rather than mathematics. His father sighs, "Artists starve." Smart boys focus on practical subjects. Translation: your authentic interest matters less than conforming to my vision of success. Over time, the child internalizes these conditions. They develop what Rogers called introjected values, values taken over from others but perceived as if they had been experienced directly. The self-concept becomes shaped not by authentic experience, but by what was required to maintain positive regard from significant others. The child learns to deny awareness of experiences that threaten this conditional self-concept. Anger gets suppressed. Artistic interests get buried. And a false self emerges, constructed to meet others' conditions of worth rather than reflecting organismic truth. This process, Rogers argued, is how we become alienated from our authentic selves. Now, let's apply this to social energy. Imagine you grew up in a family that highly valued extroversion. Your parents praised you when you were outgoing, brought you to countless social events, beamed with pride when you entertained their friends. But perhaps your authentic temperament was more introverted, more reflective. To maintain your parents' positive regard, you introjected the value, being social and outgoing is good. Wanting solitude is bad. This became a condition of worth. Your self-concept formed around this: I am an outgoing person who loves socializing. But your organismic experience might be telling you something different. Large gatherings overstimulate you. You process social information more intensely. You recharge through solitude. Yet you've learned to deny this awareness, to distort it, because acknowledging it would threaten your self-concept and, by extension, your sense of being worthy of love. So you continue attending every party, every gathering, every social event, all while experiencing profound depletion. And you feel confused and defective because, according to your self-concept, these situations should energize you. This is the exhausting tyranny of conditions of worth. You expend enormous energy maintaining a false self while suppressing your authentic experience. Rogers believed that true psychological health requires unconditional positive regard, being accepted for who you genuinely are, not for performing a role. When you experience unconditional acceptance, you can gradually release these false conditions of worth. You can let your authentic self emerge. And here's what's crucial: your authentic self includes your genuine temperamental responses to stimulation, including social stimulation. But Rogers didn't just identify the problem. He discovered what allows people to become congruent again, to reclaim their authentic experience. And understanding this will help us see why some people genuinely gain energy from socializing while others genuinely deplete, and why both responses are perfectly valid. The fully functioning person and authentic experience. Rogers proposed that the goal of psychological development isn't to become a particular type of person, extroverted or introverted, social or solitary. Rather, it's to become a fully functioning person. What does this mean? A fully functioning person, according to Rogers, exhibits several characteristics. First, they have a growing openness to experience. They can take in the experiences of life without being defensive. They don't need to distort or deny their genuine reactions to maintain a false self-concept. Second, they live with increasing existential authenticity. They don't allow past conditioning to dictate their present responses. If they enjoyed socializing last week but feel depleted this week, they trust and honor that present experience rather than forcing themselves to conform to how they should feel. Third, they demonstrate what Rogers called organismic trust. They trust their own reactions, their own feelings, their own internal compass. They rely on internal evaluation rather than constantly seeking external validation. And finally, they experience congruence. Their self-concept, their actual experience, and their outward behavior align. They are genuine. What you see is what they truly are. Now, here's what's revolutionary about Rogers' framework: it makes room for genuine temperamental diversity. Some people authentically gain energy from social interaction. Their organismic experience in social settings is one of stimulation, reward, and energization. When they're congruent with this, they're not performing extroversion. They're simply being their authentic selves. Others authentically deplete in the same situations. Their nervous systems process social stimulation differently. They require recovery time in solitude. When they're congruent with this reality, they're not being antisocial or defective. They're honoring their authentic organismic experience. Rogers would argue that both responses are equally valid expressions of a fully functioning person, provided they're congruent with genuine experience rather than conditioned responses. Let me illustrate with two contrasting stories from clinical practice. Marcus came to therapy feeling guilty about his preference for solitude. He forced himself to attend social events, then felt exhausted and defective afterward. Through person-centered therapy, he explored his genuine experience without judgment. He discovered that his preference for solitary activities wasn't a character flaw, but an authentic aspect of his temperament. As he accepted this, paradoxically, his social interactions improved. He attended fewer events but engaged more genuinely when he did. He stopped performing and started simply being present. Contrast this with Sophia, who came to therapy believing she was introverted because she always felt drained after forced corporate networking events. Yet as she explored her experience, she realized she didn't feel drained after intimate dinner parties with close friends, after teaching workshops where she was passionate about the subject, or after spontaneous conversations with strangers while traveling. The drain came specifically from events where she felt she had to perform a professional persona rather than be authentic. Once she recognized this, she could distinguish between draining inauthentic social performance and energizing authentic connection. Both Marcus and Sophia moved toward becoming more fully functioning by honoring their organismic experience rather than conforming to introjected conditions of worth. This is Rogers' profound insight: social energy isn't simply a binary function of introversion versus extroversion. It's intimately connected to congruence. When you're being authentically yourself in social situations, respecting your genuine temperament, you experience far less depletion than when you're maintaining an incongruent self-presentation. But this raises an important question: what actually causes the neurological and psychological differences in how people respond to social stimulation? Because while Rogers gave us a framework for understanding authenticity, modern neuroscience has revealed fascinating biological mechanisms that underpin these temperamental differences. The neuroscience of social energy. While Carl Rogers was developing his theory of personality in the mid-20th century, he focused primarily on subjective experience and the phenomenological field, as he called it. He was less concerned with biological mechanisms. But in recent decades, neuroscience has provided remarkable insights into why people have genuinely different responses to social stimulation. The story begins with dopamine, a neurotransmitter that plays a crucial role in motivation, reward, and pleasure. Research suggests that people who are temperamentally more extroverted have a more activated dopamine reward system. When they encounter potential rewards, like striking up a conversation with a stranger, making people laugh, or staying out until last call at the pub, their brains release more dopamine. This creates a positive feedback loop. Social interaction feels rewarding, so they seek more of it, which releases more dopamine, making them feel energized and motivated. People who are temperamentally more introverted appear to have a less active dopamine reward system for these same external stimuli. Social interaction simply doesn't trigger the same neurochemical reward cascade. They're not broken. Their brains are simply calibrated differently. But there's more to the story. British psychologist Hans Eysenck proposed in the 1950s that introverts have chronically higher levels of cortical arousal. Their brains are already operating at a higher baseline level of stimulation. This means they reach overstimulation more quickly in environments with lots of noise, activity, and social demands. Think of it like a cup that's already 3/4 full. It doesn't take much additional input to overflow. Extroverts, by contrast, are chronically under-aroused. They need external stimulation to reach optimal arousal levels. Social interaction, novel experiences, and high-energy environments help fill their relatively empty cup. Research has also found differences in how introverted and extroverted brains process social information. Introverted brains show heightened activity in the frontal lobes, regions associated with planning, decision-making, and self-control. This means they're doing more cognitive work during social interactions, more carefully monitoring themselves, processing others' responses, planning what to say next. This additional cognitive load is genuinely exhausting. Extroverted brains activate regions more associated with reward and immediate processing. They're not overthinking, they're simply engaging and responding in real time with less self-monitoring. Interestingly, research has found that after about 3 hours of socializing, both introverts and extroverts report increased fatigue. Socializing is eventually draining for everyone. The difference is the rate of depletion and the intensity required for recovery. Now, here's where Rogers' framework becomes crucial. These neurobiological differences are real. They're not character flaws or conditions that need fixing. They're aspects of your authentic organismic experience. A fully functioning person, in Rogers' terms, would accept and honor their genuine neurological response to stimulation rather than fighting against it. They wouldn't interpret rapid social depletion as a personal failing that requires correction. They'd recognize it as valid information from their organism about what it needs. This doesn't mean you're trapped by your neurobiology. Rogers believed in the possibility of growth and change. But growth doesn't mean forcing yourself to override your authentic responses. It means developing congruence with who you actually are, including your neurological realities. If your brain processes social stimulation intensely and depletes quickly, growth might look like learning to honor your genuine needs for recovery time rather than feeling guilty about them. If your brain genuinely gains energy from social reward systems, growth might look like recognizing this and creating a life that provides adequate social connection rather than feeling guilty for not wanting more solitude. The key is congruence, aligning your self-concept with your actual, organismic, neurobiologically informed experience. But here's what makes this complex: we don't live in isolation. We live in cultures with their own conditions of worth around social behavior. And in much of the Western world, one response to social stimulation is valued far more than the other. Understanding this social context is crucial to understanding why so many people struggle with social energy. Cultural conditions of worth and the extroversion ideal. Walk into any British workplace, university, or social setting, and you'll quickly notice an unspoken value system: extroversion is preferred. The open-plan office rewards those who think out loud and collaborate constantly. Job interviews assess cultural fit, often code for outgoing personality. Networking is positioned as essential for career success. Social media celebrates those with large followings and constant social engagement. Even our language reveals the bias. We call extroverts good with people while introverts are described with words like withdrawn or reserved, terms that carry subtle negative connotations. This is what researcher Susan Cain has termed the extrovert ideal, the omnipresent belief that the ideal self is gregarious, alpha, and comfortable in the spotlight. In Rogers' terms, modern Western culture has established a powerful condition of worth: to be valued, to be successful, to be worthy of positive regard, you must be socially outgoing. This cultural condition creates enormous pressure for those whose authentic temperament leans toward introversion. They internalize the message that something is wrong with them, that their genuine need for solitude reflects a deficiency rather than a valid temperamental difference. The result? Widespread incongruence. People force themselves into social situations that deplete them, then feel defective when they're exhausted. They develop self-concepts centered on being social and outgoing, even when this contradicts their organismic experience. They perform extroversion while their authentic selves atrophy in the shadows. Rogers saw this pattern repeatedly in therapy. Clients who had internalized conditions of worth from their culture, experiencing profound distress because they couldn't reconcile their authentic experience with cultural expectations. But here's what's fascinating: the research Rogers cited shows that introverts aren't less happy or less psychologically healthy than extroverts. What creates unhappiness and psychological distress is incongruence, the exhausting effort of trying to be something you're not. Studies have found that when introverts are given permission to honor their authentic temperament, when they're shown unconditional positive regard for their genuine way of being, they report equal levels of life satisfaction, meaning, and psychological well-being as extroverts. The problem isn't introversion. The problem is cultural conditions of worth that demand everyone conform to an extroverted ideal. Rogers would argue that a psychologically healthy culture would offer unconditional positive regard for the full spectrum of human temperament. It would create space for different ways of processing stimulation, gaining energy, and contributing value. It would recognize that meaningful conversation with one person can be as valuable as working a room of 50. That depth can matter as much as breadth. That some of humanity's greatest contributions have come from people who required substantial solitude to do their work. Think of Darwin developing his theory of evolution through decades of solitary observation and reflection. Or J.K. Rowling conceiving Harry Potter during quiet time alone. Or Rosa Parks' quiet courage sitting alone in that bus seat. Congruence with authentic temperament, not conformity to an extroverted ideal, enables people to make their unique contributions. The challenge for those who deplete quickly in social situations isn't to become more extroverted. It's to develop congruence, to recognize and honor their authentic experience despite cultural pressure to be otherwise. And for those who are genuinely energized by socializing, the challenge is to recognize that their way of being isn't superior or more evolved, just different. To extend to others the same unconditional positive regard Rogers advocated. So where does this leave us? If you're someone who finds social gatherings draining, what practical steps can you take to live more congruently? And if you're someone energized by socializing, how can you honor both your own needs and those of others? Rogers' framework offers a clear path forward. Living congruently, practical applications. Let's return to where we began, Sarah at that London pub, watching the clock, feeling depleted, wondering what's wrong with her. Armed with Rogers' framework, Sarah can now understand her experience differently. She's not broken. She's experiencing a genuine organismic response to overstimulation. Her depletion is valid information, not a character flaw. Her path forward isn't to force herself to become more extroverted. It's to develop congruence between her self-concept and her actual experience. This might mean: first, releasing the introjected condition of worth that says she must enjoy and thrive at every social gathering. She can acknowledge, I am someone who processes social stimulation intensely and requires recovery time afterward. This is part of my authentic temperament. Second, practicing organismic trust. When her body and mind signal depletion, she can honor that information rather than overriding it with should statements. She can leave the pub when she's genuinely ready, without guilt. Third, creating a life structure that respects her authentic needs. This might mean declining some invitations, arriving late or leaving early when she does attend, ensuring recovery time between social commitments, and seeking quality over quantity in social connection. Fourth, communicating her genuine experience to others rather than performing false enthusiasm. Rogers believed that authentic relationships require congruence. When Sarah says honestly, I had a lovely time, but I'm feeling quite drained and need to head home, she's being congruent. This authenticity actually deepens relationships rather than damaging them. For James, the genuinely extroverted person, living congruently means different things. It means recognizing his authentic need for social connection and ensuring his life provides adequate opportunities for this. It means not feeling guilty for gaining energy from situations that drain others. And crucially, it means extending unconditional positive regard to those whose temperament differs from his. The fully functioning person, in Rogers' vision, isn't someone who has optimized their social energy. It's someone who lives congruently with their authentic temperament, whatever that may be. They trust their organismic wisdom. They remain open to their genuine experience. They don't distort reality to maintain a false self-concept. And here's the beautiful paradox Rogers identified: when you stop fighting against your authentic nature, when you develop genuine self-acceptance, you often discover you have more energy than you realized. Not because you've become someone different, but because you've stopped expending enormous effort maintaining an incongruent self. Sarah might find that when she attends fewer gatherings but engages authentically when she does, she enjoys them more and depletes less quickly. Not because socializing has become less draining, but because she's no longer also fighting against herself. This is Rogers' gift to us: permission to be who we genuinely are. Recognition that your subjective experience is valid. Trust that your organism knows what it needs. And a framework for understanding that social energy isn't about being broken or defective, it's about being congruent with your authentic self. The question isn't, why do social gatherings drain me while they energize others? The question Rogers would ask is, are you being authentically yourself in these situations, or are you performing a role based on introjected conditions of worth? Because the energy you feel, or don't feel, is intimately connected to how congruently you're living with who you truly are. The path to self-actualization. Carl Rogers spent his career championing a revolutionary idea, that the most important work we can do is to become increasingly ourselves. Not a better version of someone else's ideal. Not a performance designed to earn conditional positive regard. Simply, authentically, courageously ourselves. Understanding why social gatherings drain some people while energizing others isn't ultimately about neurotransmitters or personality types. It's about recognizing the validity of your own experience. Honoring your authentic organismic responses. Releasing conditions of worth that demand you be something you're not. Whether you leave parties early or close them down at dawn, whether you recharge through solitude or connection, whether you thrive in crowds or cherish quiet, your temperament is valid. Your needs matter. Your experience is real. The exhaustion you feel or the energy you gain is giving you information. The question is, are you listening? Rogers believed that when we create conditions of unconditional positive regard for ourselves and for others, we free people to actualize their full potential. Not by changing who they are, but by finally allowing them to fully be who they've always authentically been. So the next time you find yourself at a social gathering, drained or energized, ask yourself Rogers' question, am I being congruent? Am I honoring my authentic experience? Or am I performing a role to meet someone else's conditions of worth? Your answer to that question might just change everything. If this perspective on social energy and authentic self resonated with you, consider exploring more about person-centered psychology and how understanding your genuine temperament can transform not just your social life, but your entire relationship with yourself. Rogers' work remains profoundly relevant because it addresses the most fundamental human question: how do I become who I really am?